We'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Celeste May Francois. I'm the State Director of Environment Oregon and the Beyond Plastics Campaigns Director with Environment America. Thank you all so much for being here for Tiny Plastics, Big Problems, How States Can Address Plastic Pellet Pollution. We're excited to have you all here. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, state, and title so we can see where everyone is zooming in from. This briefing is part of our fall legislative briefing series put on by Environment America and PIRG to discuss some key issues affecting our environment, our health, and our well-being. If you're interested in attending more of these events, we will put the link to our in the chat for our webinar series, and you can sign up there. So let me do that real quick. For today's briefing, I am going to start by sharing just a big picture overview of the problem of plastic pellet pollution. And then we are going to share 3 avenues for how states can take action to address plastic pellets. First, we will have a discussion about litigation with Josh Kratka from the National Environmental Law Center and David Mazer, the State Director of Penn Environment, discussing a recent proposed settlement with a plastic pellet manufacturer in Pennsylvania and the implications that settlement will have on this issue nationwide. Then we'll have Ellie Wilson, the State Director of Environment Virginia, discuss some proposed legislation that she's been working on in her state and organizing Virginians around. And finally, we'll have Luke Metzger, the State Director of Environment Texas, discuss an interesting coalition of groups that have come together in Texas to advocate for administrative action on plastic pellets. Then we're going to open it up for a Q&A at the end, but please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask questions as we go along. So let's get started. So first, just big picture, modern life has really been built around convenience. And single-use plastics like foam containers, plastic shopping bags, plastic utensils, and plastic packaging are all really commonplace, consuming an enormous amount of natural resources and creating millions of tons of unnecessary waste. In the United States, we generate enough plastic waste to fill Dallas Cowboys Stadium, which is the largest professional football stadium in the country, every 16 hours. Our wasted plastic items accumulate in landfills, create toxic ash and air pollution in incinerators, or escape into the environment. Plastic as a material is a really big challenge because it does not break down easily, if at all, persisting for hundreds of years or more, eventually becoming smaller and smaller pieces called microplastics, wreaking havoc on ecosystems and endangering public health and the overall health of our planet. And while each of us interacts with wasteful plastic packaging and products on a daily basis, and I think intuitively it makes sense to all of us that the single-use plastic leads to a lot of waste and pollution, the reality is that a lot of waste and pollution also happens long before the plastic ever gets on the store shelves. Next slide. So plastic pellets, also known as nurdles, are tiny lentil-sized plastics that are the building blocks of plastics manufacturing. Plastic pellets are what's known as pre-production microplastics because after being produced, they're sent to other manufacturing facilities to be melted and molded into many of the plastic products that are so familiar in our lives. Okay, so just a quick science lesson on how plastic is made. So through the process that turns the fossil fuels into plastic, various additives may be mixed with the plastic polymer to enhance properties such as strength, flexibility, color, and resistance to UV light or fire. Additives can include plasticizers, stabilizers, fillers, pigments, and flame retardants. The end result is a resin. These resins then undergo high temperatures, pressure, and cooling. Often this process results in long, solid strands that are then cut into plastic pellets or nurdles. Plastic pellets are normally less than 5 millimeters in size and can be made from various types of plastic resins, including polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene, and more. But pellets are not the only form of pre-production microplastics. There are also flakes, powders, films, and liquids, among others, but we're really focused on plastic pellets since it is one of the most common. Next slide. One of the challenges when we first started working on this issue was getting an understanding of where these plastic pellets were actually being produced, so that we could have a better understanding about how and where plastic pellets were entering our environment. Last year, we did a research project and mapped the location of pre-production microplastics facilities across the US. We used the data from the Environmental Protection Agency's Toxic Release Inventory database, which tracks waste management of chemicals that pose a threat to human and environmental health. We figured out which code was for plastic manufacturing and then independently verified that the facility produced pellets. So the map you see here is the result, but I will also put the link to the chat so you can look at it in real time. So if you're looking at the map, red means that we were able to verify that the plastic facility made pellets. Orange means that we were able to verify that the company makes pellets, but we couldn't find whether that specific facility does. And then white means that they were classified as a plastic manufacturer, but we could not verify that they made pellets. So through this research, we found that there are 141 facilities that manufacture pre-production microplastics of some kind. There's an additional 193 facilities that are owned by a company or parent company that produces pre-production microplastic, but there was insufficient publicly available information to confirm if the particular facility produces pre-production microplastics. These facilities are located in 33 states and within 13 of the 18 water basins in the continental United States, so in 72% of the water basins. The highest concentration, as you can see on the map, of facilities is along the Gulf of Mexico and in the eastern United States. The area with the lowest number of facilities within the continental US is in the Rocky Mountain region. Next slide. We found that these facilities are often built close to refineries and methane gas sources due to the symbiotic relationship between the oil and gas industry and the plastics industry. In addition, logistics and economies of scale play a role in where they're located. They're often clustered near shipping corridors, both rail and sea, and are often sited near waterways. Next slide. Because they're so small, cheap, and easily contaminated, at plastic factories, pellets that fall on the floor or get contaminated with dirt are sometimes washed down drains and end up in nearby waterways. In recent years, there have been several plastics facilities that have been sued for discharging plastic pellets and other pre-production microplastics into waterways under the Clean Water Act. Many of those lawsuits have ended in settlement, and we'll hear more about one of those lawsuits in just a moment. Next slide. Plastic pellets are also spilled during transport. So trains are the primary mode of transportation for plastic pellets within the US. Due to historic reasons, many trains run adjacent to waterways, which puts many waterways at risk of plastic pellet pollution. Major pre-production plastic manufacturers within the US are often directly connected to rail lines, which take their products by hopper car to the next location within the supply chain. Each plastic pellet hopper car typically carries up to 220,000 pounds of pellets. To put that in perspective, 22,000 high-density polyethylene pellets weigh about a pound. So that means up to billions of pellets can fit into a single rail car. Plastic pellets easily spill when being loaded in and out of rail cars, and once loaded in, the pellets can leak from valves and other openings that aren't being closed or used properly. As a result, plastic pellets have been found along train tracks, often finding their way into waterways, and eventually the ocean. Plastic pellets can also spill if there's a train derailment. In fact, every Class 1 freight train company has had a train derailment that has resulted in a major plastic pellet spill in the last 10 years. One of the most infamous train derailments involving plastic pellets was in 2023 in East Palestine, Ohio. And while the spillage of the known carcinogen vinyl chloride was the focus of news coverage, it's less known that the derailed train was also carrying polyethylene and polyvinyl plastic pellets. In fact, the car whose wheel bearing failed and overheated was carrying pellets, which then fueled the initial fire. Next slide. Plastic pellets can be found anywhere, but are found in the highest abundance near the facilities that produce, transport, transfer, or use them. Pellets lost on land will likely eventually find their way to waterways. And so, for that reason, they're most commonly found on riverbanks, lake shores, and beaches near the facilities that handle them. This is a map from our coalition partner, Nurdle Patrol, which is based in Texas. It's a citizen science project that seeks to quantify how many pellets are found in the environment. Each of these dots represents somebody going out into their local waterway or local community and looking for nurdles and then recording what they found. Next slide. So just how many pellets find their way into the environment? There's an estimated 10 trillion plastic pellets that end up in our marine ecosystems every single year. And plastic pellets are considered the second largest source of primary microplastic pollution globally. Next slide. Once in the environment, they are nearly impossible to clean up. Gathering spilled nurdles is like trying to collect grains of rice that have been dumped out of an airplane. Next slide. And all of these plastic pellets in the environment are harmful for wildlife. Studies have shown that when fish consume microplastic, it can decrease their numbers and strength by causing many internal issues, including inflammation, immunotoxicity, and DNA damage. It can even change their behavioral patterns, swimming, and feeding habits. Shorebirds and seabirds are particularly vulnerable to eating industrial microplastics due to their accumulation on beaches and floating in our oceans. They, along with fish, turtles, and crustaceans, can confuse plastic pellets for food, as pellets resemble organic matter, such as tadpoles, fish, and salamander eggs. And if they mistake too many pellets for food, they can starve, as the plastic blocks their digestive tracts. Next slide. You, you can see here how they might easily make that mistake. Next slide. Pellets also contain chemicals, including plasticizers, flame retardants, UV stabilizers, etc., and they act as sponges. So plastic pellets have been observed to absorb toxic chemicals, including DDT, PCBs, and mercury. And these types of pollutants, they bioaccumulate, so they become more concentrated and more toxic as they move up the food chain. So if we eat an animal or fish that has ingested nurdles, we're exposed to the plastic and toxic chemicals from the animal. Next slide. So the bottom line here is that companies shouldn't be allowed to pollute our waterways with plastic pellets. Despite their small size, plastic pellets are causing big problems for our environment. And that's why we're working to build public awareness of this problem, identify opportunities to push for solutions, and are doing work in several states to address this environmental challenge. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Josh Kratka, a managing attorney at the National Environmental Law Center, and David Mazer, the state director of Penn Environment, to tell us more about their recent settlement with Styropec.
Great. Thanks, Celeste. I'll start us off and then I'll hand it over to Josh Kratka. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name, as Celeste said, is David Mazer, and I'm the executive director for the statewide citizen-based group Penn Environment, which is the Pennsylvania affiliate with the Environment America Federation. And the story that Josh and I are going to lay out here is a story about citizen environmental groups in Pennsylvania using the Federal Clean Water Act and a law known as the Pennsylvania Clean Streams Law to stop illegal discharges of plastic pellets in one of Pennsylvania's waterways. But it's also the story about the local waterways themselves. In Western Pennsylvania, just north of Pittsburgh, about 40 minutes north of Pittsburgh, this is a story about Raccoon Creek, which is a beloved local waterway regularly used for fishing and paddling, boating, hiking, bird watching. When Josh and I were there, folks jet skiing along the confluence. So a very popular recreational waterway. And it's also the story about the Ohio River, obviously an iconic waterway in the US that supplies drinking water to about 5 million Americans. It's also the story about a facility along the banks of Raccoon Creek, owned by a company called Styropack. And Styropack is the self-proclaimed largest manufacturer of polystyrene pellets in North America. At the specific facility in question, Styropack produced at the height of its production processes approximately 123,000 tons of polystyrene, what many of us often call styrofoam, polystyrene pellets every single year. We can go to the next slide, Grace. And essentially, how this case came around is that um, staff at a partner group that we work with, Three Rivers Waterkeeper, which is part of the Waterkeeper Alliance, its staff and members had gone out to do some baseline testing for plastic pellets in the Ohio River prior to the construction of a facility fairly well known in Pennsylvania known as the Shell Cracker Plant along the banks of the Ohio River. And the Waterkeeper members were surprised to find pellets in the water samples they took. You can see here in the slide, here's an example of how they capture and take water samples. The Waterkeeper members found plastic pellets in these trawls, and actually along the banks of the Raccoon Creek, it was visible in the vegetation and along the shoreline. And essentially they traced them back not to the Shell Cracker Plant, but actually back to Styropack's wastewater outfall, which was a pipe that came up in underwater in the middle of Raccoon Creek and was discharging tiny plastic pellets. At the time when the Three Rivers Waterkeepers approached the company, Styropack said that they didn't know that they were discharging them, and in fact, I think debated that the plastic pellets were theirs. But after investigations by the company themselves, by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and this citizen science being done by nonprofit groups, it proved otherwise, that Styropack was the source of this pollution. And that really became the catalyst for the suit that Josh will talk about next. At that point, Three Rivers Waterkeepers reached out to Penn Environment and the National Environmental Law Center to see if there was action that could be taken and if these discharges of plastic pellets were legal or not. So with that, I'll turn it over to Josh to talk about the legal piece of this case from the National Environmental Law Center. Josh.
Thanks, David. Josh Kratka. I'm with the nonprofit National Environmental Law Center. Our mission is to bring citizen-based enforcement cases against primarily against big industrial polluters across the country. And in this case, Three Rivers Waterkeeper and Penn Environment brought us one. The legal question here was really straightforward and simple. The way the Clean Water Act works is any point source discharger of pollutants, like a factory, like a plastics manufacturing plant, can only discharge pollutants into surface waters like Raccoon Creek if they have a Clean Water Act permit, and they can only discharge the pollutants listed in the permit in the amounts that the permit allows them to discharge. Anything else is illegal. Very simple system, which is why the Clean Water Act works so well. In this case, Styropack's permit did not allow them to discharge plastic pellets. Those plastic pellets are a pollutant. Their discharge of them was therefore clearly illegal. So when the company was slow in responding, very slow in responding to the claims and evidence found by the citizen groups, we sent a notice letter to the company as required under the Clean Water Act, telling them that we thought they were doing something wrong, explaining what we believed it was, and letting them know that within 60 days we would be filing a lawsuit if the problem wasn't corrected. The problem was not corrected, and so on behalf of the groups, we filed a Clean Water Act enforcement case in federal court in Pennsylvania to get the company to comply with its legal obligations under the permit. The State Department of Environmental Protection also got interested in this case once the citizen groups brought the problem to their attention, and they ended up intervening as a co-plaintiff with Penn Environment and Three Rivers Waterkeeper in this lawsuit. Eventually, the company decided it wanted to negotiate a solution rather than litigate. We took a site visit at the plant with our expert engineer. We saw exactly all the problems. So there was no question that this company had no control whatsoever of billions of and trillions of little plastic pellets that they were manufacturing. And after about a year of gathering information and negotiating, we reached a settlement. The settlement of this case, which was filed just about a month ago, requires Styrapec to completely redesign its wastewater and stormwater systems to achieve a zero discharge of plastic pellets. The settlement requires real-time monitoring at all of their wastewater outfalls. And this new monitoring technology can detect even a single pellet that passes through their wastewater outfalls. Styrapec has to pay stipulated automatic penalties now every time they discharge a plastic pellet in violation of this settlement agreement and in violation of their permit. And the company agreed to pay a $2.6 million penalty, 95% of which is going to fund remediation to the extent possible of the pellets that have already been discharged and other watershed protection projects in this heavily impacted area. So the takeaway from this lawsuit and the settlement is this. The largest polystyrene manufacturer in North America has agreed that it is possible to get to zero tolerance, zero discharge of plastic pellets from a major plastics manufacturing facility. They've agreed to do it, and we're going to hold them to doing it. So zero discharge is achievable. Second, state regulators, even in Pennsylvania, which is a gas drilling, fracking friendly state, state regulators, even in Pennsylvania, can step up and enforce a zero discharge requirement of plastic pellets into the environment. And third, it's really important to know that new monitoring technology exists and has been used here and in other places in the country now as a result of these court settlements. Technology exists that can detect a single pellet that's discharged from an industrial outfall. And this kind of monitoring is key to both enforcing limits, no discharge limits, and protecting our environment. So just to emphasize, this is not pie in the sky dreaming by environmentalists. These elements of the settlement are not only necessary to protect the environment, we've proven that it's both possible to do these things both technologically and practically. And I'll turn it back over to David.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Before I hand it over to our next speaker, I want to take a minute to talk about, as Josh said, this is a groundbreaking case, but how state elected officials and regulators can implement the results of this case. So as Josh noted, this is really a roadmap, not just for getting Styropec and its facility to a zero discharge of plastic pellets, but it should really serve as much more than what any one facility can do. And I think that's really the most groundbreaking part of this, is that the parameters of the lawsuit could be used to be implemented by any state for any plastics manufacturing or distribution facility. So let me walk through the ways that we recommend state officials can utilize this suit to rein in plastic pellet pollution in your own state. Number one, state regulators can certainly take the technical parameters of our settlement and roll it right into plastic facilities' existing Clean Water Act permits, which are required under federal law to come up for reauthorization every 5 years. So using that renewal opportunity to have state regulators support what Pennsylvania DEP has implemented here can really move the needle in your own state. Number two, state regulators can do a statewide rule requiring that all facilities implement this technology the next time that their Clean Water Act permit comes up for reauthorization, or the state agency could require them to apply even sooner to amend their permit to include this no discharge requirement in their pollution permits. This is probably the fastest, most efficient way to do this if the politics in your state would allow for this. And then, of course, state environmental agencies as well as citizen groups can do what we did in Pennsylvania with the National Environmental Law Center and Three Rivers Waterkeeper, which is to go out and identify violators in your state, take legal action to stop charges of pellets that's afforded to us under the Federal Clean Water Act, and then make the parameters from the Styropec settlement part of future settlements taking place in your respective state. So as you can see, this is really a groundbreaking opportunity to take the best practices agreed to and systematically implement them across the nation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker. Let me introduce Ellie Wilson, the State Director for Environment Virginia, for our next part. Ellie.
Hi, thank you so much, David. Grace, you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about actual legislation in order to make our waterways plastic pellet free, and what we've done here in Virginia to get the ball rolling on that, and what we're aiming to do in this upcoming legislative session. So you can go to the next slide. So when I started learning about pre-production plastic pellets and we had released that map, I, zoomed in on Virginia and realized that, we have 7 facilities here in Virginia. We actually have another one currently being built. And so I wanted to, get a handle on whether or not I could find pellets by doing a nurdle hunt on my own. Grace, you can go to the next slide. And then I also wanted to think about it a little bit more broadly. So as Celeste had mentioned, there's plastic pellet loss at every step of the supply chain. And in Virginia, we have a lot of ports, a lot of train yards. So I figured that, this would be a bigger issue than just at those 7 facilities, and that it was something we more broadly were going to have to be looking at here in Virginia. You can go to the next slide. So then what I did is I actually kind of made my own map. So in red, you can see the pre-production plastic manufacturing facilities. In yellow, kind of hard to see, are ports, and then train yards as well are in yellow. And so then I actually looked at which ways the water flowed in the rivers, as most of those are on waterways, and determined a bunch of spots that we should be looking to see if there's plastic pellet pollution. Go to the next one. And so this was the first place that I went. It's not the best picture to see what I'm talking about, but right across that waterway is one of the pre-production plastic facilities. And then actually up the waterway is some of our biggest ports in the Commonwealth. You can go to the next slide. And I found a lot of pellets. So as I've gone to these blue spots, some more than others, but absolutely from the spot that was in that picture just then, I found a ton of pellets and was like, we need to do something about this here in Virginia. What is a solution that we can pursue? And nationally, there was the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act. And I thought, how can we do this here in Virginia to legislate this, rather than going through the lawsuit route and having to, take care of it case by case? How can we actually just make sure that this is in Virginia's laws to ensure that it's not happening? So you can go to the next slide. So we introduced a Virginia plastic pellet free waters bill last year. Delegate Nadarius Clark was our patron on this. It was HB 2178, if you'd like to look at what the language was. But it was I chose that patron because he has a history of working on microplastic legislation. And so I thought it was a, natural partnership. I will say I approached him around this time last year, which with our session starting in January, really isn't a ton of time to do the education and, awareness building that we normally would like to do. But I thought at the very least, we could have a really good conversation and raise this issue. And that's exactly what we did. So you can see me there in committee. I brought what I carry with me all the time is my jar of pellets, and actually had all the legislators looking at them and, really learning about this type of plastic pollution that they weren't aware of. Our bill prohibited the discharge, really clarified that in the law at all facilities, ports, anywhere that they may be. And it required monitoring technology and, a variety of different best practices that we know companies can implement in order to reduce this pollution. So the bill was out ultimately left in committee, which is like a really nice way to say no to a bill. So there was a lot of, enthusiasm, but it was a new issue for legislators. And so we planned to reintroduce it this year and do a ton of more actual pellet hunts and also doing more just awareness raising with legislators in the general public. So you can go to the next slide. And so that's what we did. So we have engaged with the media around this issue. We've worked with a group of citizen outreach canvassers to actually gather thousands of petitions on this issue to demonstrate that Virginians are really concerned about this, and also just educate Virginians because a lot of people may not have actually known that this was something happening all the time. And that picture with all the folks in the t-shirt there, right behind it is where fishing pier is, and just 10 feet away is where we found hundreds of pellets. So kind of emphasizing the impact on wildlife there. But we also met with legislators on this issue as well. You can go to the next slide. And Virginians overwhelmingly agree. Virginians support the idea that we're taking actions against these companies in a proactive way to ensure that we do not contribute to the 10 trillion plastic pellets entering our ocean every year. So we have a lot of waterways in Virginia, the Chesapeake Bay, and going into the Atlantic Ocean. And so having a hold of this issue here is just really important because of our role and where we are located. So we're excited to bring this back again this next year. And I think that it's a really smart, common sense thing to ensure that these companies aren't just regularly polluting these into our waterways. So we're excited to see where that legislation goes in 2026. But with that, I believe that's my last slide. I will pass it over to Luke Metzger, the Director of Environment Texas.
Thank you, Ellie. So back around 2018 or so, there was a shrimper and fisherwoman named Diane Wilson. Next slide. Oh, yeah, there we go. There she is, who discovered thousands and thousands of pellets that were washing into the water and along the shores of Matagorda Bay, where she collected shrimp and fished. And so ultimately, she and her organization, another San Antonio Bay estuarine waterkeeper, sued Formosa Plastics and also forced them to adopt a zero discharge standard. And that lawsuit prompted a state representative in Texas, Republican Todd Hunter, to file a bill to require a similar zero discharge standard across the industry. And that bill didn't move. However, he was able to get the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to agree, as part of their upcoming revision of the surface water quality standards, to take action on plastic pellets as part of that revision. Next slide. And so the TCEQ, in their draft proposal, included a zero discharge standard. and applied both to the plastic manufacturers, those holding the pollution discharge elimination system, TIPDES, which was asked about in the Q&A. TIPDES is the Texas version of NIPDES, but also to other facilities that handle pre-production plastics, including the train rail companies, et cetera. And it also then required that the facilities adopt best management practices to prevent the discharge. And so we supported the proposal, definitely thought it could be stronger, but it was an important proposal and would have made significant improvement on the problem, we think. Unfortunately, next slide, the petrochemical industry was not a fan of the proposal and lobbied to eliminate the proposal from that surface water quality standard revision. So that was a big setback, unfortunately. So now several years later, the TCEQ is once again, as required, updating its surface water quality standards. It has to do that every 4 years. And we're making a second push to get TCEQ to once again propose rules to limit pellet pollution, but then to this time actually move forward and promulgate them. And we think we have a few reasons why this time we're in a better position to stand up to the petrochemical industry and get TCEQ to move forward. Next slide. First is there's just growing public concern about plastic pollution, including along Texas beaches. There was a study few years ago that found Texas beaches are the most littered in all of the country. Next slide. There's also been growing concern within the fishing community about what the impact of microplastics might mean for fishermen and the seafood industry more broadly. Next slide. And there's also just been growing new science on studying what the impact of microplastics might be to our health, where we're finding microplastics, throughout our body, even in our placentas and in blood and our brains. And so we know that the case for action from a health perspective is even stronger than it was several years ago. Next slide. So we've been working to build a diverse coalition that could help demonstrate to the TCEQ and to the governor, who appoints the commissioners of the TCEQ, that we need to finally take action. So first, we worked with a gentleman named J.P. Bryan, who is an oil and gas executive, to write this op-ed for the Dallas Morning News, calling for action to reduce plastic pellet pollution. He's a very conservative man. He was the former head of the Texas State Historical Association, but he also really loves, really loves sea turtles. As a child, he has fond memories of walking along Texas beaches with his grandmother, where they would look for sea turtle nests and mark them. And we know that sea turtles, along with other wildlife, are at risk from plastic pollution, including plastic pellets. Next slide. We also worked with a gentleman named Joe Gebbia, who is the co-founder of Airbnb, and worked along with Elon Musk around the Doge team federally. He was also appointed by President Trump to be the U.S. Chief Design Officer, and he also cares about microplastics. He wrote an op-ed for the Washington Times this summer, urging that plastic pellet pollution be part of the Make America Healthy Again movement. He's also talked to the governor several times about this issue. Next slide. We've also built a coalition that includes other conservation groups, but also the Charter Fishermen Association, the Coastal Conservation Association, which represents tens of thousands of recreational fishermen in Texas and around the country. The city of Galveston just recently passed a resolution because they're concerned about what this pollution means to their coastal tourism economy. They note that one of the main sources of income for the community is the people who come to Galveston beaches, and they don't want to see plastic pellet pollution on the beaches. Groups like the Texas Oyster and Mariculture Association, which are concerned again what the impact of pellets could be to the seafood industry. Next slide. So we know that the industry has a voluntary program to address plastic pellet pollution called Operation Clean Sweep. It's been around since the 90s and really has just been kind of a lunch and learn kind of program without any real transparency or accountability. None of the participants in the program, release to the public what they're doing to reduce plastic pellet loss, or whether it's actually working. However, there are a lot of good, things that we could look to from that program if we just required the companies to do it and required them to report. Next slide. As we're pushing the TCEQ to adopt new standards, we think there's simple things that the state could do that just echo what the industry itself agrees is a best practice, including auditing their facilities to figure out how are the pellets actually getting lost? How can we, there's often simple things we can do to prevent their loss. Reporting any spills, in Texas and around the country, you're required to report an oil spill, and these pellets are basically solid forms of oil. They should be required to report those spills as well. They should monitor their wastewater and stormwater, and we should classify the pre-production plastics as solid waste, which would empower regulators to better prevent their release. So that's, I think, all I have, and I'll turn it back to Celeste.
Great. Thanks so much, Luke. So that wraps up our presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or need any further information. We are a resource for you as we are working to address this issue in states across the country. So thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.